I don't know how to respond. Everybody's quiet, seated, and ready to go. Wow. Well, I'm excited. We are starting a new quarter. We did this last September, October and November. We looked at characters, and we got it started with some more familiar names like Abraham and Moses and David. This time around, as I started making a list, I didn't realize it until after I had gotten some feedback from others asking them to teach, but it's all Old Testament characters, and they're bad guys. So tonight we're going to talk about Cain. Next week, Joseph's brothers, and eventually we'll have some other characters. The 10 spies. Cody is going to teach on King Saul. And several other people have volunteered, including Ricardo, my father, Ahab and Jezebel, Jonah. As I go through this getting started for the next couple of weeks, I do want to talk about the bad guy, Cain. No redeeming quality about him ever given to us. But I also want to talk about Abel. So we will talk about some positive and make some application. Now, when you might teach, some of the men in the congregation are going to take a turn. You do you. You do it the way you want to do it. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 4 tonight, and I'm going to focus on the text. Genesis chapter 1. What is Genesis 1 all about? The creation, the 6 days of creation. Chapters 2 and 3 give us more detail about the creation of Adam and Eve, of the first humans. Do they have children in chapters 2 and 3? No children. What happens in chapter 3? So you've got this perfect, idyllic Eden, this perfect paradise, and it's ruined. Ma'am? Okay, so they disobeyed God. Then you go into chapter 4 and everything's fixed. Now what happens in chapter 4? Yeah, okay, they have children, and Cain kills Abel. What we're looking at is Hebrew narrative, especially in the first 11 chapters. It's terse. Really, all Hebrew narrative is that way. It delights in using as few words as possible to tell the story. And chapter 4, verses 1 through 16, is a great example of just how brief and terse Hebrew narrative is. What we all know is that Cain is going to kill Abel. If somebody doesn't know that, spoiler alert, sorry, I just told you. That's the big dramatic moment. However, as we go through these chapters, I want us to observe, as we go through these verses, I want us to observe its connection with chapter 3 in particular, but also a couple of verses in chapter 1 and chapter 2. For example, in Genesis 4, verse 7, God is speaking to Cain, and he says, sin, its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Well, that exact same wording, at least in the English Standard Version, it's the same words being used by God as part of the punishment to Eve. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Well, these same words are used in chapter 4, verse 7. Isn't that interesting? So what does that suggest to us? Just looking at this one verse corresponding with some words in chapter 3. As we read chapter 4, is it completely separated from the first 3 chapters? In particular, chapter 3. Or is the narrative continuing and telling us about the continuation of the fall, the continuing effects of the fall?
Well, it tells that Abel was a keeper of flocks and Cain was a tiller of the ground.
Yes.
But now they have to go out and tend to the flocks and do all this other stuff.
Okay, so Cain basically did what his dad did. He's a farmer. And Abel is doing something different. Well, that's not the only correlation between chapter 4 and then chapter 3. You have God asking a couple of questions. One is a where question. Where are you? God asks Adam. Where is Abel, your brother? And then that's followed with, what have you done? In Genesis 3:16, did you eat of the fruit of which I told you not to eat? Well, in chapter 4, verse 10, God asks Cain, what have you done? You've murdered your brother. And then this is also important for our study of Cain. In Genesis 3, what did Adam and Eve believe? If they ate the forbidden fruit, what would God do to them? We can't even touch the forbidden fruit lest we die. So when God finds out, he confronts them. What have you done? What are they expecting him to do? Kill them, I guess. And there is a curse. There is a curse that takes place upon the earth. But look here also at chapter 3, verse 14. It's not just the ground that is cursed, and we are living with the effects of that, with all the weeds and who knows what else from our gardening. But you've got disease. But cursed are you. Who is cursed? Adam and Eve, are they cursed in Genesis 3? The answer is no. They are not cursed. In fact, God blesses them. Now, he drives them out of the garden, but he's going to bless them. And through the promises God makes to Abraham, he wants a whole earth to be blessed. So Satan is cursed. That's Genesis 3:14. What happens, what promise, what prediction is made in Genesis 3:15? Genesis 3:15, the first prophecy in the Bible. And it's pointing to whom, ultimately? Jesus. So Genesis 3:15 says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, talking to Satan, the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He, that is, her offspring, he shall bruise your head, you shall bruise his heel. When we come to chapter 4, do we just forget about that promise? Or do Adam and Eve anticipate that they're going to have a snake crusher who will descend from them? That's what they're hoping for. Well, in chapter 4, verse 11, we find out it's not Cain. I think Adam and Eve thought it was going to be Cain. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. But now God actually curses Cain. You are cursed from the ground. Adam and Eve were not cursed, but Cain is. And there's another connection here between the first few chapters. Chapter 4, verse 2 tells us that Abel was a keeper of sheep. Well, that word was used as a command for Adam to keep the garden. It doesn't just mean pull the weeds. Well, maybe there were no weeds. But it means he is going to protect the garden. He's going to guard it. That verb is used all throughout the Old Testament. And then Cain was a worker of the ground, like his dad. And so Adam worked and kept the garden. And I see a connection also, although the words are not used, but this general command that God made in chapter 1. At the end of chapter 1, after he created Adam and Eve, or he created man and woman in verses 26 and 27, and then he gives them this command. Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over everything on the earth. That is also extended to their offspring. That's what they're supposed to do. They are working and keeping the land and the animals as they subdue all the animals. All right, chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. And I want you to notice how it plays out here in the first few verses. You have Adam knew his wife, And she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Does this sound good? Does this sound exciting? They are doing exactly what God did, reproducing. And so God made the first man. Well, now she has made the second man with the help of the Lord. Yeah, this is great. And then the next verse says that she bore his brother Abel. Then the narrative will talk about Abel. Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. And then, so now we have Cain's occupation. So having gone Cain, Abel, Abel, Cain, what do you think is going to happen next? Who's he going to tell us about? Cain, in verse 3, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of the flock and of the fat portions. Now let's consider the offerings. Who's he going to consider first? Abel, and the Lord had regard for Abel's offering. So, way to go, Abel. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So how does Cain respond? Cain was very angry, and his face fell. Very literal rendering there. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Well, what's going to happen next is Abel is going to be killed in verse 8. So we've got this pattern that is unfolding. In fact, the name Cain alternates with Abel. It goes like this, verse 1 and verse 2. Cain, then verse 2, Abel, Abel, Cain. Verse 3, Cain, Abel, Abel, Cain. There's some artistry here. Is this a little story that's just thrown together? What would this suggest? This is very carefully crafted. We are meant to see the artistry here as it presents the story to us. So this is not some fable. This is not some thrown together story. It starts promisingly, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And then at the end of the story, what does verse 16 say? That man gets as far away as he can from the Lord. He went away from the presence of the Lord, settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And that's not where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be close to God with the family. All right, let's take a look at these various sections as they're presented to us. We've got Cain and Abel being born, and then we quickly jump to their occupation. Are we told about their childhood? Are we told about, some of the rivalries maybe they had as kids, or going fishing together? Right? No, that's not the point of the story. What is the point of the story? Cain killed Abel. The fall continues to have ramifications until eventually we get to Genesis 6. God says, I'm gonna start over with Noah, but that's not going to go real well, is it? So Cain is going to end up going away from the presence of the Lord. But here we have a little glimpse into their lives. Abel keeping the sheep, Cain tilling the ground, working the ground. He's a farmer. Abel is a shepherd. Okay, then they go to church. In verse 3, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offspring, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, his face fell. And then there is a one-sided conversation here between God and Cain. Verses 6 and 7. Let's read these verses. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. We already talked about the connection between this verse and Genesis 3, verse 16. How is sin being portrayed here? Sin is crouching out at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. How is sin being personified? Like a lion. Some sort of ferocious animal. Probably not a sheep. Probably something like a lion. So this is a one-sided conversation. And how does Cain take it? Yeah, I'll do that, Lord. That's not what happened at all. So there are two sacrifices. And we wonder and we look at the text because there's just not much there. There's just not much there. Why was Abel's sacrifice regarded and Cain's not regarded? And one of the explanations I heard growing up as a kid is, well, you know, in Hebrews 11, verse 4, this is a really important verse. This is part of the Hall of Faith. It says, by faith Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain. And faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. That means that Abel heard God's instructions, and he heard what he was supposed to do, and he offered this sacrifice. And Cain either didn't hear it, or it just went in one ear and out the other, and so he missed the instructions and disobeyed God in that way. I remember hearing that in Bible classes. What do you think?
He apparently didn't put much into his offering.
Okay. We would say, it's probably, they knew exactly what to do. But Cain, as John has just said, didn't put much into it. Why do you think that? Just because of the rejection?
Abel gave of the firstborn of his flock of the fattest portion.
Okay.
But it just says that he gave of the ground. It doesn't say that he put anything into it.
Okay. So in the Old Testament cultic system, they offered animal sacrifices. Did they offer from the fruit of the ground? Yes. So we've got both going on here. Grain offerings, for example, were presented to the Lord. And what kind of grain was it supposed to be? Was it at the end of the harvest, or this got rained on and it doesn't look really good? We'll offer that to God. Or was it supposed to be the best of your, whatever it is, the fruit of the ground, wheat or barley? Yes, sir. Well, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. With Abel, it says the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And all it says about Cain is he offered the fruit, an offering of the fruit of the ground. I mean, it makes sense because Cain's a farmer, Abel is a shepherd, and they brought the proceeds of what they had. And we wonder, what is it that's different here? Is it arbitrary? Is it that Cain was supposed to go to his brother Abel and say, hey, can I borrow a sheep? I'll give you some strawberries or something, and I'll trade you here. Yes, sir. I don't think that's right. And that has not changed.
Even though you're offering literally, God still did not regard them because the heart, the life is not right. And I think the root of it is perhaps.
The root of it is the heart.
Yes.
It's not that Cain offered the fruit of the ground. Does anyone think it was, he was supposed to offer a different kind of sacrifice? Yes, Jennifer. Okay. Yeah. Jeff?
We often think that it wasn't, top quality stuff that he was offering. But if it wasn't, even if it was top quality, if he offered it in a flippant manner or in a
Okay.
manner that wasn't able to honor God, it still wouldn't get us.
And that's the thing with Hebrew narrative, it is brief. And it doesn't give us all the answers. And so we have to think about it. And we say, well, that's a defection, not a defection, that's a defect in the text. No, it's designed this way to make us really think and say, why was Cain's sacrifice not approved? And can my sacrifice not be approved like Cain? Did you have a hand over here? Yes.
No, I can say something.
Okay.
It says verse 5 that he had no regard for his offering. So,
In contrast to Abel's, he had regard. That's right. Him and his offering, not just the offering. When we offer to God, are we detached from the offering itself? When we pop a check in the collection plate, are we giving of ourselves? Yeah, in fact, that's what God wants. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, he says the Macedonians first gave of themselves. And that's what excited Paul so much. It wasn't the amount. Because Corinth, he's writing to Corinth, who are much more affluent and well-to-do. The amount that the Corinthians were going to give would be much greater value than the poor Macedonians up north of Greece. But the attitude of heart at that time far exceeded what the Corinthians had done. And so Paul's trying to motivate them to get that collection together as he's coming to them from Macedonia. Cain was rejected, he and his sacrifice. In Hebrews 11, verse 4, it says, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. How does Abel still speak to us today? How does his example still shine in the 21st century world in which we live? He gave his best. He gave his best. And his sacrifice ultimately was his life. And that's a comparison that is made in chapter 12. We'll look at that verse, Hebrews 12. We'll look at that in a moment. Maybe I ought to pull a Larry and just say something like, so Shane, how is it that Abel offered the better sacrifice? I should just do that. Okay. Well, what happens next? One verse tells us that Cain killed Abel. So Abel obviously was accepted by the Lord. Is it possible? Shane, what do you think? Do you think mommy and daddy, Adam and Eve, have their firstborn son, and they're excited about him, and he's doing what dad did. He's keeping the garden, and he's a farmer, and he's great. And we also have Abel, which we're glad we have Abel, but man, Cain is the future. He's going to be the serpent slayer because he's the firstborn, and we're excited about that. What do you think?
Possible.
Okay, great. It's possible. We don't know what's going through Adam and Eve's head. We would like to say, now Adam and Eve treated their sons exactly the same. They had no favoritism toward either one. They just loved them both. But as Genesis unfolds, what do you see again and again? There are favorites. And we also see the younger superseding the older. Who's supposed to get the birthright? Who's supposed to get the inheritance? Well, the older. But time and time again in Genesis, as the story unfolds, you have Isaac, who is not the firstborn, but he is the son of promise. Jacob and Esau, who was older by just a little bit. They were twins. But who was actually the firstborn? Esau. who receive the Abrahamic blessing. Joseph is the one who receives the land blessing, the double portion. But even when Jacob is blessing his two sons, he puts his right hand on the head of the younger and his left hand on the head of the older. So Manasseh and Ephraim. And what does Joseph start to do? Yeah, switch his hand. You know, you get the boys to switch places. And Jacob says, no, you don't understand. There's a pattern that unfolds. So I wonder if Cain and Abel were treated differently by Adam and Eve. After all, we don't have some sort of statement made after Abel is born, but when Cain was born, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And then she bore her brother, his brother Abel. Okay, all right, whatever. Abel was a keeper of sheep. Not like that. What do you think? Well, I think it's grounded on some facts, but you're right.
The more we discuss it, the more options we have to discuss, and then we go off the deep end. We have to be very careful.
Okay, but hold on. When Cain, the favorite, perhaps, maybe, when he is rebuked by God, how does Cain respond? Me? You rejected my sacrifice? What? I'm the firstborn. I'm the favorite. Mom likes me best. Well, I'm telling you, that's how it's going to play out in later chapters.
You know, it may be that Cain was thinking it's my right as the oldest and didn't put out as much work. Even though he had a harder job,
Yeah.
the land is a lot harder than
Anybody heard sheep can say, wait a minute, that's not right.
it's not easy.
Maybe for you. Yes, sir.
It could be that he's just demonstrating that he preferred a blood sacrifice over a ram.
Okay, and that's what I was discussing earlier and saying that's what I heard growing up. What do you all think about that? That God really just wanted a blood sacrifice, and Cain the knucklehead didn't get the message or got the message and just said, well, I'm going to offer what I have.
Well, this isn't the only place where God took away things because they didn't give the best sacrifice.
Okay,
So it happens other places.
all right.
It wasn't that the grain sacrifice is unacceptable. I'm sure it was acceptable. And, but God's preference for blood sacrifice. And
Okay.
Cain met.
So it has nothing to do with Cain's attitude or Abel's attitude? It's the sacrifice itself?
I need to study some more, but I'm not sure the text says that.
Right. All we have is this ambiguous wording that Abel brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but Cain he had no regard. So the sacrifice was an offering of the fruit of the ground. And there isn't a statement that says something like Cain brought the best of his produce or anything like that. He just brought produce. So I don't know. And again, going back to Hebrews 11 verse 4, the idea is, well, faith comes by hearing. So Abel must have heard, hey, I want a blood sacrifice. And then Cain either ignored that or didn't get the memo. I'm not sure if that would be fair to Cain. Regardless, what does God give Cain an opportunity to do? Try again.
Mark, I don't know what this has to do with anything, but I noted a reference regarding Cain's sacrifice, or Cain's offering,
Uh-huh.
and it pointed me to Leviticus chapter 2, verse 12.
Okay.
And I read
And that's something the grain offering in Leviticus 2.
Yeah, you can offer the first fruits, and it could be the first from the ground. And then it says, but they shall not be offered on the altar for a pleasing pleased by Abel's, but not of Cain's, maybe because
It wasn't
Abel's
of the
was
first
a
fruits.
better sacrifice because of the situation.
Yeah.
It couldn't be offered as an allotment for that special.
And that's what I would contend, especially in light of Leviticus 2 and that wording, an offering of first fruits. And he's talking about the grain offering. I don't think it's because Abel offered a blood sacrifice and Cain offered a non-blood sacrifice. However, that's what I've heard all my life. I don't know. I think it's because Cain did not offer the first fruits of the ground. Yeah, and it gets to the heart. Now, Jennifer, I need you to speak up.
Yeah, I think it might be the heart posture because God was probably pleased with both of them. But it makes me think like whenever you need help in life, and then whenever someone knows you need help and they just help you without you asking, you're very pleased. And then if you ask for the help, you're very pleased as well. But it's more pleasing when someone knows you need help and they, go ahead and
Okay,
help you.
yeah.
So it's like, okay, that's more heartfelt. But at the same time, it's pleasing when someone helps you when you ask for the help. But like that makes a friend. So God is probably pleased with
Okay.
our posture.
Larry, what do you think?
So one of the things that we know for sure is our God hasn't changed from the time of the beginning to now to eternity. And so God makes it very clear what he expects of his people. And so even though we don't have what he may have told Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve, if you can rest assured that they knew what God expected of them, because at this point, he wouldn't hold them accountable for something that
I would certainly not
and
think that he
so,
would.
At this point, knowing that, regardless of if it was because it was this or that or whatever, just the most important part here is Cain didn't do or didn't fulfill what God expected of him.
Right.
And so I think that's a big deal. And then he has the opportunity to do something about it, and then he doubles down on it by killing his brother.
Okay.
And so I think that's important.
So whether Cain was supposed to also offer a blood sacrifice, as you most often see in the Old Testament, because we don't really emphasize the grain offerings and that sort of thing. That's not nearly as exciting. No blood. Be that as it may, he disobeyed him. Let's move on to verse 8. Cain kills Abel. I've highlighted some text that is actually not in the Hebrew Masoretic text, kind of a famous addition, and that doesn't mean it's not what Moses wrote, but I'm just pointing that out. You may have a footnote that tells you it appears in the Septuagint, the Syriac, the Latin Vulgate, and even the Samaritan Pentateuch. And so it doesn't really change anything, but it gives us a little dialogue. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. These versions of the Hebrew Old Testament say, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, let us go out to the field. And that's the only time that we have Cain and Abel communicating with each other. But be that as it may, he killed him. Here's Hebrews 12:24, where he's giving this series of blessings we have as part of the new covenant. You have come to Mount Zion. That's where he started. You have come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. This is a significant event, not just because it shows us the first murder, it shows us the first brothers, but it has something to do with Jesus. How does the death of Abel have anything to do with Jesus? Cain showed himself to be not the serpent slayer. Who is he aligned with? If he's not aligned with God, who is he aligned with? The seed of the serpent, with evil. And that's how it plays out as we go into Genesis 6. You have the continued decline of humanity, and it all starts with Cain, who left the presence of the Lord and wandered in the land of Nod, which is the land of wandering. So he wanders in the land of wandering. How is the blood of Abel? It's inferior to the blood of Christ, but how are they connected?
One is the fact that regardless of how Cain did it, Cain killed Abel. Abel was sacrificed.
Abel was sacrificed.
And God had already accepted Abel because of Abel's offering. So in a way, that kind of points to somewhat of the same thing that happened to Christ.
Okay.
He was sacrificed for no good reason.
That is definitely something for us to think about. And I think what it's getting at is, let me bring it back up. That the blood of Abel is anticipating. It is looking toward the sacrifice of Jesus. The people who killed Jesus, did they want him dead? Oh, you bet. Did Cain want Abel dead? Abel was going to be the serpent slayer, at least of the line of the serpent slayer. But he was cut short. And we say, well, okay, you got Seth, kind of as if another son can just replace him. We know even less about Seth than we do about Abel. But Abel and all of the heroes of faith, quite frankly, points to Jesus. Abel and the blood of Abel is a shadow. It is the type looking toward Jesus and his ultimate sacrifice. In verses 9 through 16, you have a conversation between Cain. What is this that you have done? And it connects directly with the curses of Genesis 3. We're not going to have time to look at that. But on the screen, I have verses 3 through 7 highlighted and verses 9 through 16 highlighted. These are the only places where there's any dialogue between. Well, that's really not true, because you do have his mother making that statement, and then God's one-way conversation. So you've got this text here where it connects with Eve and her punishment, and then Cain and the curse that comes upon him. In verse 7, though, God is trying to reason with him. Sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. How can we apply that verse to our lives today?
Every one of us is given the opportunity with the knowledge that we have of the Word of God, along with it, pure conscience, if we not conscience and not sleeping, to come back and defeat the things that are wrong against our conscience and against the Word of God. We have that ability God has given us. Now, there's some things, practically speaking, that we are unable to. But in those cases, God provides the help. But we know when we're confronted with things that are not possible.
All right. Does God help sinners get out of sin? Does God bless sinners when he doesn't have to? Cain, we didn't look at it, but Cain in his curse says, this is too hard for me to bear. I can't do this. And then God helps him, basically saying no one is going to avenge the blood of Abel by killing Cain. Don't know. You talk about it. I have no idea what that is about. But it's some sort of protection. So even though God has taken the first son and cursed him and driven him out of the garden, or of his family, becomes a wanderer, goes his own way, God still helps him, protects him. Now, if you read the rest of chapter 4 with the descendant of Cain, Lamech, he famously says, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. What does Jesus do? You know, Lamech is mad because somebody hurt him. He killed them, slaughtered them. Hey, you know, my ancestor Cain did that. I'm going to do it 77-fold. What does Jesus do when he's asked the question, how often should I forgive somebody? up to 7 times. Line, they are aligned with the devil. We must master over sin, and if we don't, what's going to happen? We're going to lose our soul. Is there any redeeming quality about Cain in your mind? Anything good said about him? You know, there's so little said about him. But what about Abel? What words did Abel speak? What did he say? Not a word. What still speaks to us today, though? The blood of Abel still speaks to us. And his life, however brief, stands as an incredible example of what it means to dedicate our all and give to God our absolute best. Dallas, can you put up that last slide? So next week we're going to talk about the last slide. We're going to talk about Joseph and his brothers. So from the negative, it's going to be the brothers, but from the positive, it's going to be Joseph, of course. But then there's one brother in particular who really, really shines, and who is that? Of the 11 brothers, oh, well, I guess I should say 10 brothers, not counting Benjamin, which of the brothers really comes through? So Joseph, and which of his brothers makes a change? And we talked about him Sunday night in our Bible class, Genesis 38. Who was the scoundrel in Genesis 38? Judah, who will stand up to Joseph in chapter 44 and say, I give my life in place of Benjamin. Something happened to Judah. He made a change. And so we're going to talk about the character of the brothers and how some of them didn't change, and how one of them in particular actually inherited the Abrahamic blessing because of his character. And Judah is the one through whom Jesus came. Well, thanks for studying with me. I wish we had more answers for that enigmatic little passage, but I hope we've been able to make some application to our lives. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to start off our songs by 898, Unto Thee, O Lord. Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. Yea, let not that weight on thee be ashamed. Yea, let that weight on thee be ashamed. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. Remember not the sins of my youth. Remember not the sins of my youth. O my God, I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. In the gray book, it's going to be Faithful Love, 103. Faithful love flowing down from the thorn-covered crown makes me whole, saves my soul, washes whiter than snow. Faithful love calms each fear, reaches down, dries each tear, holds my hand when I can't stand on my own. Faithful love from above came to earth to show the Father's love, and I'll never be the same, for I've seen faithful love face to face, and Jesus is his name. Faithful love is a friend just when hope seems to end. Welcome faith, sweet embrace, tender touch filled with grace. Faithful love, endless power, living flame, Spirit's fire, burning bright in the night, guiding my way. Faithful love from above came to earth to show the Father's love, and I'll never be the same, for I've seen faithful love face to face, and Jesus is his name. Sticking in the gray book, we're going to 86, Higher Ground. I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay. Though some may dwell where these abound, my prayer, my aim is higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost height and catch a gleam of glory bright. But still I'll pray till heaven I found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Amen.
Good evening. In just a moment, Noah Smith will lead us in a closing prayer. And just a few announcements to update us on. We're still keeping in mind that Janine has her appointment with her surgeon tomorrow. No, she had it today. So do we have surgery scheduled? Medication. Very good. Okay. That's what happens when you get the announcement assignment as services are starting. So Nabaka's great-grandson Sebastian did have his procedure and apparently is doing well. So keep him in your prayers as well. Dolores Finner looks like under the weather the last couple of weeks. She's doing better now. And Eve White's daughter, Savannah, is recovering from COVID. Don't forget the gospel meeting coming up the 22nd through the 25th with Don Truex. Make your plans for that. And the men's breakfast is next, I think. No, the teens are next. And the breakfast for the men is October 5th, looks like, and then on down the line with all the other events posted in the foyer. Anything else to be updated? Okay, Noah?
Please bow. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for the time that we have to come together to worship you and to honor you, to give glory and thanks to you, to uplift one another who are sitting next to each other today and this evening. Today is, as we know, September 11th. We honor those who gave their lives during years ago during this frightful day. We thank you for the many members who serve now. We ask that you be with them and that you protect them. Lord, help us to remain Christian in times of struggle and strife, that we overcome our problems, overcome the sin that we are faced, the trials and tribulations that we are faced. In everything that we do, we ask that we ask that you help us to relay what it means to be Christians in our actions, in our words, in the way that we do things in the workplace, at school, and throughout our week, our lives, for that matter. Lord, please be with those who were unable to be here with us today, that you, for whatever reason, whether due to sickness, health issues, family members, whatnot, we ask that you be with them, comfort them, and we ask that hopefully we will be able to see them the next time we meet. As we go home, please be with each and every one of us to be safe and arrive at our home safely, and especially with those who have to travel. Please be with us throughout the week. Help us again to put you first. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.